In order for us to preserve and embrace our identity as Filipinos, we should first understand our literary, artistic, and cultural heritage. This includes historical events that transformed and awakened our Filipino spirit and patriotism.
Maayong adlaw. Charles Dominic Sanchez here of the Cebuano Study Center, inviting you to the Vicente Sotto lecture series where we feature a host of writers, artists, academics, and experts from various other fields to impart their knowledge of Cebuano art, literature, history, and culture in general onto us. Not only will you learn some stuff about our province's rich past, but you'll also come to appreciate how you yourself are a result of that past.
This series is named after the late Don Vicente Sotto, who was regarded as the father of Cebuano language and letters. He published not only the first newspaper in Cebuano, Ang Suga, in the 1900s, but also published the first Cebuano short story, Maming. He also wrote and directed the first Cebuano realist drama. He was a man of protean accomplishments, a prolific writer and publisher, a renowned lawyer, and a pioneering labor leader who left his own personal mark in the practice of Philippine politics and culture.
Hopefully, you'll walk away from these lectures not just with mere factoids and tidbits of trivia, but also the necessary knowledge connections that will enable you to look at the world differently in a way that helps contribute to a better tomorrow for the generations yet to come. Daghang salamat. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the September installment of the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series for the year 2021. Please make yourselves comfortable as we prepare for another cultural and historical feast for the mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind the audience of a few house rules. One, kindly make sure your mics are on mute to avoid any disruptions in the course of the program. And two, please do not forget to answer the evaluation form before the end of the program. A link to this form will be posted in the chat box below later on. Your certificates of participation will be sent to you via email only after you have accomplished said form. Thank you. Now let's start with an opening prayer to be led by Irene Silvet Dayao, a fourth-year literary and cultural studies student from the University of San Carlos, to be followed with the singing of the national anthem.
Hello, good afternoon. Am I audible, Russell?
Yes, Irene, we can hear you.
All right. So let us put ourselves in the holy presence of God as we all say, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Dear God, thank you for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us. We are truly grateful for them. Thank you for allowing us today to meet and share our knowledge and time with one another in the 7th installment of the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series 2021. May you extend your divine wisdom to our speakers so that they would be able to impart their knowledge effectively to all of us. Bless the participants as well so that they would be able to glean the vital information from today's webinar. May you bestow your blessings after this webinar so that we may go out and spread what we learned in the spirit of your love and generosity. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw, ewas ang sinakanan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyag ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagagang tutok sa simoy at sa langit ng pagaw, ay tinatang tulakaw.
Maayong hapon kanatong tanan. For the benefit of those who've only joined us just now, the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series is a monthly lecture series that explores and articulates further on the rich literary, cultural, and historical heritage of Cebu. Today, we will be hearing from an esteemed researcher and heritage conservation specialist, and also an educator. But before we begin, here to welcome us today and to officially open the program is the Deputy Director of the Cebuano Studies Center, Dr. Bea Lastimosa.
Good afternoon to our esteemed guest speaker, Mr. Trizer Mansueto, and to all our participants. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this month's installment of our lecture series organized by the Cebuano Studies Center of the University of San Carlos. The Cebuano Studies Center is a center of research on all aspects of Cebuano culture. It functions as a special library to house source materials pertaining to Cebu, as well as the predominantly Cebuano-speaking areas in the country. Also was a research center devoted to studies pertaining to Cebu in the areas of the humanities and social sciences, and as a special office assisting in the promotion of Cebuano culture and the arts. Over the years, it has become an active instrument in encouraging and supporting research activities within the university in the areas of the social sciences and the humanities. In addition, it has become a model of its kind as a local regional research center in the country through its varied activities in the conduct and promotion of local and regional studies. Now, the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series is one avenue by which we do this. This monthly lecture series, which ran many years ago, has been revived under the direction of Dr. Hope Yu, with the goal of adding to the discussions on Cebuano culture, arts, and history. With these lectures, we hope to make the rich cultural heritage of Cebu more visible to the bigger public, and we hope to create venues where the public can join in the discussions with renowned researchers and experts in the field of Cebuano studies. Now, since reviving the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series last year, we have heard from several esteemed researchers who talked about different aspects of our history, culture, and local traditions. And this afternoon, we are very honored to have Mr. Trizer Mansueto as our speaker. Sir Dale was actually my Humanities 1 teacher and also lecturer in the Third World Literature class that I attended under Dr. Hope Yu. So it is a pleasure and an honor to have him here with us today. He will be giving a lecture on the Lost Forest of Cebu, covering the years 1880 to 1920. The lectures we bring to you serve as acts of cultural production, which also serve as a means of boosting cultural identity. Whether tangible or intangible, culture plays a key role in reinforcing identity, binding together a community, and diversifying our national identity. It is in this spirit that the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series has taken shape. So on behalf of the Cebuano Study Center, I welcome you all today. Thank you.
Thank you for those warm and welcoming words, Bea. Before we proceed any further, I'd just like to remind everyone once again to take note of the evaluation form, the link to which will be posted in the chat box toward the end of the lecture. Also, if you have any questions for our speaker about the topic he will be discussing today, feel free to type these in the chat box as well, and we will do our best to address as many of these during the open forum after the lecture proper. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Mr. Trizer Mansueto obtained his Master of Arts in History from Silliman University in Dumaguete. He is a researcher, writer, translator, and was involved in the setting up of various museums throughout Cebu. He has contributed feature articles on history and heritage in local periodicals such as Cebu Daily News, the Philippine Daily Inquirer, and Bisaya Magazine. Additionally, he is the co-author of several books such as Balaanong Bahandi, Sacred Treasures of the Archdiocese of Cebu, and Via Veritatis, The Life and Ministry of Ricardo Cardinal Vidal, both published in 2010. Our Mother of Perpetual Help, Icon and the Filipinos, Multidisciplinary Perspectives to a Perpetual Help Spirituality, and Integración Internación, the urbanization of Cebu in archival records of the Spanish colonial period, both of which were published in 2017, and Bilangan, selected papers from the 2018 International Conference on Cultural Statistics and Creative Economy. He also authored The History of Danao City, one of 50 plus books commissioned by the province of Cebu in 2011. He is currently pursuing a PhD in history at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and teaches part time at Cebu Normal University. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm virtual round of applause, please, for Mr. Trizer Dale Mansueto.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Can you see my slide, Charles?
Yes, sir, we can see your slide.
Okay, see. Okay, so basically, this is the abstract, no? Sorry. So Cebu Island used to have a forest. During the Spanish era, Cebu's natural heritage was cut down to address the demands of agriculture. When the Americans took over, what was left of the forest had to be further cut down to address the growing need for lumber and for more agricultural areas. In this paper, we seek to answer the following questions. Number one, what was the extent of Cebu's forest during the last 2 decades of the Spanish era? Number two, how did it further decline during the first 2 decades of the American era? And number three, what were the effects of its decline in Cebu? The Philippines used to teem with forests. Before the Spanish conquerors arrived, the early Filipinos' lives were interconnected with forests. The forest was so lush that John Boring admired that, I quote, among the richest of the Philippine islands, the forest trees occupy an important place. Another foreign observer echoed the same great admiration for the abundance of forests more than 5 decades later, when Dean C. Worcester in 1914 wrote, "There is little room for doubt that practically the entire land area of the Philippines, from the plains at sea level to the highest mountain tops, was originally covered with forest growth." The early Filipinos heavily depended on their forests. The very houses that the Magellan expedition found on the shores of Cebu were made of forest products, as these were of wood and were built of planks and bamboo. Even the implements used in households were made of wood from the forest, and even the boats that crisscrossed the various islands were from the forests. Even the fate of the early Filipinos revolved in the forest with forest anitos, whom they believed dwelt in sacred trees and images called larawan, carved from tree trunks. Despite their dependence on materials coming from the forests, it could be surmised that the early Filipinos had little impact on it. In order to subjugate the early Filipinos, they were brought to the reducción, which entailed the clearing of a huge plot of forest land in order to resettle Filipinos in villages. In these villages were built homes and the church and the missionaries' convent, which were all made of wood. Multiply that to the various settlements that were established all over the archipelago. Once the villages grew and had sufficiently been Christianized and Hispanized, it became full-fledged towns with more structures constructed with government offices which served as seat of governance. It is estimated that during the Spanish colonization, there were around 27,000 hectares of forests or 90% of the total land area of the Philippines. With the rise of population, there was then a need for sure sources of food. With this, agricultural products were introduced, particularly from Mexico. Forests were once again cleared for the purpose so that crops would not have to compete with other plants and could be easily tended to. The process of cultivation used by early Filipinos was through kainin, where they cleared land of trees and plants through fire. The forest continued to be exploited as forest products were exported. More trees were also felled in order to construct galleons, which would bring Philippine products to Mexico. Foreman made huge profits with the volume of lumber he delivered. For this, he brought his men to the forest to fell the hardest and the tallest. Then they hauled the great trees to the nearest shipyard for cutting and sawing into lumber. These shipyards were located in Cavite, Albay, Panay, Camarines, Marinduque, Cebu, and Masbate. As the Philippines was drawn to the global economy in the 18th century, yet more forests were cleared in order to make way for more crops like cinnamon, pepper, corn, and sugarcane. These and other products were not only brought to Latin America, but also to other Asian ports and even in Spain. The list of crops included indigo plant, coffee, and cacao. Comin, as cited by Purpose, reports that average annual exports amounted to 175,000 pesos, which included not only sea products but also forest products like dried meat, ebony, timber woods, and etc. exported to Bengal, Madras, and China. Now let's talk about Cebu's forest during the Spanish era.
Sir Dale, excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Have we moved to a new slide already? Or
Not yet, Charles.
okay, sige. Sige, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So documents on the forest in the Visayas, particularly Cebu, is sparse, but we can reconstruct a picture of it based from several documents. We don't have any idea how huge the forest was in the Visayas, but we can nonetheless have a picture of it based from Alcina's short description. And he said, the timber of these islands is abundant, excellent, of a great variety, and easily available to the woodman's axe. Perhaps there is no land in the world that would, I do not say exceed, but even equal to it. For the lack of records, we don't know exactly the breadth of Cebu's forest from the 16th to the 18th centuries. In mid-19th century, Cebu province was described as having trees of amazing sizes growing in its forest, of which some are hard and incorruptible wood, very good for construction. During this time, Cebu already had a considerable population. During this time, Cebu already had a considerable population size who lived in towns founded during the early part of the Spanish occupation. It would seem like some Cebuanos this early had started to migrate to Negros Island. In order to ascertain the condition of the forest of Cebu, we randomly chose several towns located in the various parts of the island from the book of Buzeta y Bravo. We picked up how forests were described as well as the population and the agricultural products found in these towns if applicable. So this is the data that I got from Buzeta y Bravo. I only chose 8, but there are more. Some of the towns in Cebu don't have data on forests though. So we have here Barile, Bulhoon, Karkar, and Katmon. And then we have Cebu, referring to Cebu City, or then known as Santissimo Nombre. Then we have Dalaget, Danao, and Hinuluan, which is today's Toledo City. Prior to the 1840s, agricultural products were mostly for local consumption and for domestic trading. Sometime between 1840 and 1850, however, with Cebu City becoming a new entrepot for products coming from the Visayan Islands, crops from other nearby provinces were unloaded in the city to be shipped to Manila. Some Chinese mestizos of Cebu sometimes no longer waited for provincial traders to come, but rather sent their own agents to the islands in order to buy produce directly there. As a result of this brisk trading, Cebu experienced great economic changes during this period. With money, Cebu's Chinese mestizos bought tracts of lands in the east coast of Cebu Island from Danao in the north to Karkar in the south, which they planted to sugarcane. As a result of the sugarcane boom, some of the forests of Cebu's east coast had to be axed or cut down to be planted with cash crop. In 1853, Cebu was already well known for sugarcane cultivation. 3 years later, Cebu was already producing 90,000 pickles of sugar. One pickle is equivalent to 63.26 kilos. The opening of the port of Cebu to world trade on June 30, 1860, further fueled the demand for export crops from nearby towns in southern Cebu. From nearby provinces, rather. At about the same time, settlers from the various towns in southern Cebu were already moving to the northern part of the island and clearing forests in order to turn these into farms. With the rising population, Cebu's forests were further being threatened with depletion due to the rising demand for building materials and for fuel. Thus, the development of agriculture, particularly the so-called sugar rush, contributed greatly to the denudation of Cebu's forests. As the forests were cut down, sugarcane haciendas also expanded in effect. Parallel to the denudation of Cebu's forest, according to Larkin, the greatest intrusion into frontiers of Negros happened during 1850 and 1886, when planters and small farms sliced into the wilderness, which resulted into the creation of farming communities, which priests turned into missions and later as parishes and full-fledged towns. Loss of forests due to lumber was not only felt in the Visayas, but also in Luzon and in Mindanao. Forests were not only felled to make way for agricultural lands, but also for civil and naval constructions. With forest conservation in mind, as early as 1855, the Marquis of Novaliches proposed the creation of a board of foresters. It was only in June 17, 1862 that a royal decree was signed ordering the dispatch of a professional forester to the Philippines. The Inspección General de Montes was eventually founded with the arrival of a senior forester and his 4 auxiliaries in the country in order to supervise and protect the various forests found in many parts of the archipelago. Most likely, what was documented in Negros also happened in Cebu. The fast exploitation of the forests of Negros continued through the 1870s, when Spanish government sold blocks of land known as realengas on unoccupied territories belonging to the crown. Interested parties could purchase land at giveaway cost or show proof of prior cultivation called denuncia, then claim the land free of charge. Later, the prices of realengas increased from 1 to 2 pesos per hectare, then from 6 to 10 pesos. In fact, 2 Negros hacienderos were able to purchase 1,200 hectares of land through this manner, according to Larkin. The Spanish Forest Bureau in 1874, based in Manila, reported that Cebu's mountains were already in bad state and that much of the coastal lands had been dedicated to agriculture. On July 13, 1874, it stepped up its efforts by urging the Spanish government in the Philippines to issue a decree to encourage the citizens of Cebu and Bohol to practice a more sustainable way of cutting what was left of its forests in the hopes of staving off its total disappearance. In 1876, the Inspección General de Montes de Filipinas reported, and I quote, "The forests in another time was extensive and well populated. They are today in a pitiful state and reduced to almost 2 lumps of trees, one in the south and another in the north of the island of Cebu." The same Spanish Forest Bureau continued to report the same lamentable situation of Cebu's forest in 1892 because it had been asked to make way for more agricultural lands, but also because these were turned into residential areas. It also reported that the former forest lands had become unproductive and reducing the mountains which were used to be full of trees into mere wood patches. As a result, Cebu had to import lumber from Leyte or from Surigao in Mindanao. Without its forests, Cebu would also import lumber from Negros Island. Manila, Iloilo, and Vigan also joined Cebu in importing lumber from Negros for construction purposes. As an effect of the devastating earthquake in 1863, which toppled many structures in Luzon, the demand for lumber even increased because homeowners believed that it gave their houses the flexibility so that these would not collapse during earthquakes. Statistics and detailed maps pertaining to the condition of the remaining forests in the Philippines, however, were lost after a fire that gobbled the office of the Inspección General de Montes de Filipinas in 1897. In 1898, the Americans came. After a brief fight, the Spaniards eventually sold the Philippines to the United States during the signing of the Treaty of Paris. When the deal was done, the Philippines became a US colony. Now let's talk about the first 2 decades under the United States. About 1875, on occasion of the Philadelphia Expo, the first statistics on deforestation was compiled. About 70% of the archipelago was still forested, but most of these were found in Mindanao and beyond the reach of the authorities in Manila. On February 19, 1908, before the Committee on Insular Affairs of the House of Representatives, Major George A. Hearn of the Forestry Bureau of the Philippines told committee members that there were about 60,000 square miles of forests in the archipelago. He also informed them that good lumber were sold in Manila for $35 to $175 per 1,000 board feet, and that the residents of the Philippines use about 80 million to 100 million board feet per year. So that's according to the hearings before the Committee on Insular Affairs, House of Representatives, House of the Representatives in the United States. In 1914, there were only about 54,000 square miles of forests left, while the rest were classified as agricultural land. At the time of American occupation, 2/3 of the Philippines' wonderful natural heritage had ceased to exist. During this time, Cebu had already completely lost its forest cover. Elsewhere in the Philippines, there were still forests. The American colonial government, where there were still forests, the American colonial government further gave its imprimatur to cut the forest further. Besides this, there were also several Filipinos who took advantage of the lack of forest guards who accordingly cut down some timber worth 15,000 to 30,000 in order to raise $100 worth of rice. The latter practice had to do with shifting cultivation, where forests were felled in order to turn it into agricultural land. In fact, sometimes Filipinos would first plant a grass area with seeds of rapid growing trees, then cut and burn them before they plant their crops. Discussion. Based on Spanish and American sources presented, the Philippine archipelago was indeed covered with forests. According to Worsted, the activity of the natives of the islands prior to the arrival of the Spaniards, despite clearing land for agriculture and cutting of timber for various uses probably had minimal effects on the forests. When the Spaniards arrived, about 90% of forest lands remained. Due to the need for shelter and government as well as ecclesiastical constructions, trees were felled from forests. With the increase of population and the need for food, portions of forests were cleared to provide for land settlements and more fields for crops. When the Philippines was drawn to international trade, more forest lands were cleared so that many hectares will be planted to cash crops like abaca, cacao, or cocoa, coffee, copra, tobacco, sugarcane, and other crops for export, which by 1894 ranked $32,279,000 for the colony. In the early 19th century, Cebu still had some of its forests, particularly on the north and northwest, as well as the chain of mountains from the southern tip of the island all the way to Cebu City. The coast, however, already had settlements and fields. The principal agricultural products of Cebu included sugarcane, cotton, tobacco, and abaca, while trading was controlled by the mestizos who bought products from neighboring provinces. Hectares upon hectares of Cebu's forest had to be cleared for agricultural purposes. Thereafter, particularly planted to sugarcane. The cultivation of the land started with the clearing of the forest through kaingin, which involved cutting and burning it before planting was done. Kaingin has adverse effects not only of habitat for animals, but it also prevents the dispersal of other species. Jordana pointed out that it was the main cause of the great damage brought to forests. In 1874, foresters from the Spanish Forest Bureau lamented the loss of Cebu's magnificent forest through fire, because of kaingin. Besides those who practice kaingin, there are those who wantonly cut trees, and the condition is even worsened because of the corrupt practices of municipal, provincial, and judicial officials who prevent the strict enforcement of law. During the Spanish and American eras, there was a high demand for lumber for construction purposes. There was also a demand for wood products to be used as fuel. During the last 2 decades of Spanish occupation, Cebu's forests were already gone. With the loss of forest, also came the loss of the rich wildlife. Kaingin itself would have resulted in the loss of their habitat. Without their habitat, it would be impossible for wildlife that were once abundant in the forest of Cebu to survive. Despite the efforts of the Spaniards and the Americans at conserving the forests, development took its toll on them so that what was once the forest primeval had been reduced to the status of cultivated landscape. In other cases, instead of cultivating the former forest lands, these had been left abandoned, only to be invaded by Congon, which is often difficult to control. Cebu is a classic example whose soil had become unproductive, according to Vidal Isoler. Its mountains were considered wastelands, which had a thin layer of soil, which is easily eroded with rain. The degradation of forests further resulted to other problems. According to Vidal Isoler, he observed that the deforested slopes caused the river to run dry during summer and to turn into raging flood during the rainy season. Spanish authors had often considered the climate of the Philippines as unpleasant because of the cool atmosphere, as pleasant rather, because of the cool atmosphere that makes the heat caused by the tropical sun bearable. But due to the denudation of forests, especially in Cebu and in Manila, the residents in the two areas had already complained of excessive heat. Vidal Isolar also mentioned about the destruction to settlements during times of bagyos, or typhoons because there were no more trees which would have acted as defense from its onslaughts, all because forests had been cleared to make way for some agricultural products. By 1916, alarmed at the denudation of Cebu's forests, the Philippine legislature appropriated 10,000 pesos under Act 2649 in order to reforest parts of Talisay and Mindanilla towns with an aggregate area of 4,095 hectares. What happened to the reforestation effort, we know nothing about at the moment. But if you're going to look at the picture on the screen, this is supposed to have been one of the sites that was reforested in Cebu. But unfortunately, what they planted, what the Americans planted were pine trees. No, so that's the reason why if you go to Trans Central Highway in Cebu, you can still see pine trees. Perhaps these were the very same pine trees that were planted by the Americans in 1916. So to conclude this paper, let us turn to the near prophetic advice of Vidal y Soler. No, so we have here a monument to the forester Sebastian Vidal y Soler. This used to stand in Manila, but I am not very sure today if it is still there. This is Vidal y Soler wanted to emphasize the need to temper greed in order to conserve our forests. So this is what he said. Health is important to a nation, and the habits of men are contributing for him to suffer the effects of climate one day, all due to the search for quick prosperity. Denudation of forests will have dire results as man sees the forest as an enemy, not considering that without it, there would not be a drop of water to drink, nor air for citizens, nor air to breathe for citizens. So that would be all for this afternoon. Daghang salamat o maayong hapon. Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Sir Dale, for that very enlightening and enriching lecture on the lost forests of Cebu. So now that our speaker has finished with his piece, it's time for him now to answer questions from some of the audience members. I've actually started to receive some from our literature majors, and I think there's so far we don't yet have in the chat box, but our literature majors have already started airing their questions. Feel free to once again feel free to post your questions in the chat box, and we can address these to Sir Dale now that it's the open forum session of the program. Okay, so Sir Dale, are you ready?
Yes, Charles.
Okay. So this first question is from Nikki Belen. She's a third-year literature student. Nikki would like to know, do you find improper reforestation efforts, such as the planting of invasive species, worse or just as bad as deforestation?
Yes, certainly, because pero I'd like to clarify, no, perhaps in the past they still did not have this concept of the proper way of reforesting denuded forests. So that was the reason why they planted, instead of planting endemic species, no, of trees, they planted how do you call that? They planted pine trees. So certainly sayop dida siya no ang practice nila sa una nga nagtanom sila og mga kuan og mga pine trees instead of endemic trees that used to be seen in not only in Cebu but all over the Philippines.
Okay, thank you, Sir Dale. So another literature student, Megan Bedonia, she would like to ask what is kaingin exactly? Maybe you can elaborate on that further. Is it an indigenous or pre-colonial practice? And if so, why does it draw so much flack considering that pre-colonial Filipinos were said to have a more harmonious relationship with the land?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, it is a pre-colonial practice, no? But in a way, during that time, it was still sort of sustainable because there were still a few people at that time. There were still a few farmers who were practicing kaingin. So it is only later on that nangadhan na ang mga farmers that kaingin became a bad practice because what they did was they cut the trees, no, the forest, and then they actually burn the forest. Then later on, they would leave behind the forest for some time. Diha na sila, diha na maliko na nila later para diha na tanggal. And then the process would continue on and on because after ang katong cleared patch, after sa cleared patch, they also move on to other areas na po in a certain place.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Sir Dale. So I'll take a break first from raising questions from our majors. Rafi posted in the chat box. He'd first like to thank you, Sir Dale, for your talk. And his question is, what could be the possible explanation for the shift from the indigenous belief of inhabited trees or forests to this denuding?
Sadly, it's actually due to Christianity. No, there was actually what do you call this? A documented case in Negros where the people of Negros used to worship a particular ancient tree. But then here comes the Recollect missionary. What he did was that he cut down the tree, the sacred tree, in order to show to the citizens, no, to the indigenous people that there was really nothing sacred to it. If, for instance, you invoke the name of Jesus Christ. No, so basically, it's actually because of the coming and the introduction of Christianity that we lost the sort of value for the sacredness, no, of our forests. And of course, I'd like to add also one of the greatest reasons why perhaps Cebu's forest was denuded because it's actually because of the construction of several churches. Construction of several churches. It's actually because you had to cut down an entire forest in order to construct a church. So that I've actually read several documents, church documents, particularly detailing the construction of church. I am referring to, for instance, the Church of Liloan. So during that time, during the construction of the Church of Liloan, there were no longer trees nearby to be cut down. So what they did was they had to import logs from the nearby Camotes Islands because there were no longer trees in the area.
Okay, thank you for that, Sir Dale. Another question from Nikki Belen. She would like to ask, how does Cebu's forest denudation compare to that of other Visayan islands? And if Cebu's was noticeably more rapid, why so?
Okay, if we are going to compare it with other neighboring islands, murag pare-pareha ra siya og status with that of Bohol because according to the sources that I've read, people were also cutting down the trees in Bohol kanang rapidly no unya kanang if you compare it with Negros no mas dugay-dugay man nga putol ang mga trees sa Negros because it only came much later kay Negros used to be a heavily forested area no but ang kaning mga trees sa Negros were only cut down or the forest in Negros were only denuded during the American era because the Americans were selling lumber no, for various purposes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for that response, Sir Dale. We have another question from Rafi. Would you know of possible resources we can read regarding indigenous conservation of forests? And I think Jeffrey Asuncion is asking something similar. Jeffrey Asuncion is asking possible primary sources or references on the denuding of forests in Cebu during the Spanish period. I think we can answer Rafi's question first. Sources regarding indigenous conservation of forests.
Unfortunately, I have not come up with sources detailing the conservation no, of forests in Cebu. Perhaps naana siya pero I have not encountered one yet. That's why this is sort of a primary research still. No, I still have to expand this. So perhaps if I can see more sources in the future, perhaps we can include that. So yeah, what was the other question, Charles?
Jeffrey Asuncion is asking, apart from Vidal y Soler, what are the possible primary sources or references on the denuding of forests in Cebu during the Spanish period?
Well, the sources are actually sparse. No, due to the pandemic, I have not actually visited the National Archives of the Philippines. I was told no, there are actually documents that are found, no, primary documents found in the National Archives. Pero unfortunately, I have not been there since due to the pandemic. So perhaps naagin do because I heard or I've read somewhere that some of the documents from the Inspection General, some of the documents from the Inspection General are actually found no, in the National Archives. So probably if we get hold of that, we probably have a bigger picture no, of the denudation of forests in Cebu. If we are only able to tap that resource.
Okay, sir. Thank you. This question is from Dr. Hope. What is your opinion regarding forest bathing that seems to be popular in Japan?
Forest bathing. I think it's okay, no, as long as you don't do any harm to the forest. So, basically, if you don't do any harm to the forest, then I think that's okay. Pero once you cut down trees, no, especially nowadays, limited na kayo atong mga kahoy sa Cebu, and then that's already another question.
Thank you for that, sir. We have a question from Eddie Lee. He would like to ask during his pre-Hispanic time, maybe you can get more into the land stewardship relationship of the Cebuanos to the land, and what were possible forest restoration methods used during this period.
Basically, wala ra gid nga nila gi-exploit no ang forest at that time, since there were only a few Cebuanos at that time. No, there was a lesser population. So probably that's also the reason na nganong wala kay nila na hinabdan ang forest. Actually, diha naman din na siya nagsugod ang pagputol sa mga kahoy in Cebu when the Spaniards came, because of the need to construct homes, churches, and government installations.
Sige, sir, thank you. We have a question from Gino Paradella. He would like to ask, what are your views about the deforestation of the Cebuano forests vis-a-vis the sociocultural development of the island?
Again, please.
What are your views on the deforestation of the Cebuano forests vis-a-vis the sociocultural development of the island? I think he wants, maybe you can just talk about like the relationship between like deforestation and the economic progress Cebu has been enjoying over the years.
Sige. So basically, Cebu also benefited from it, no? Kaning sa pagka-denuded sa forest sa Cebu, Cebu also benefited from it because several tracts of lands were actually converted into haciendas. In fact, kanang mga haciendas today are still present no in northern Cebu, and they are still planted to sugarcane. So basically, we benefited from it. But of course, dili sa ta maka-question pod no sa ilang the way they thought of things before, because ang kining mangong conservation, no? The concept of conservation was not yet no in the minds of majority of the people. No, although of course we recognize no Vidal Isodar, because as early as the early 19th century, nakahibaw na siya no na siya idea of conservation. Otherwise, Cebu would not have developed no kung wala sa tingali pamutla ang mga kahoy. Pero mo na siya, if we are going to look at yung mga old photos bitaw, especially of the mountain side, no? Kasagaran na kay barren na din siya even during the American era. So diha na siya nagsugodaan during the Spanish era.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have two questions here that are kind of related. One is from our literature major, Megan Bedonia. Another one is from Walter Dayata. So Megan is asking, do you think tree planting initiatives in schools actually help Cebu's environment? And this ties with Walter Dayata's question. Whether or not it helps, what do you think is the most helpful way as a student to help protect the forests that we have now?
I think ang kanang reforestation helpful ba yan siya? No, but of course we have to be guided no by experts. We don't just kanang plant trees no because for the sake of planting trees. We should also plant no katong trees na we should plant trees that we used to have in our forest. So muna siya, it would matter. Helpful man siya, pero it would matter na we consult experts and we plant katong mga kaugalinggon ng mga trees no, that used to stand in our own forests.
Thank you, Sir Dale. So the next, this next question is from Christian Tugunon, another literature major. Do you think colonial architecture or the ways that the Spaniards mandated that buildings and construction projects be designed became detrimental to the native forests?
Yes, that is true. Especially, di ba, I mentioned about the earthquake that took place in 1863. No, before most of the buildings, particularly in Manila, these were already planned. These were already constructed using stone, no, bato, like mga simbahan, like houses, no, government buildings. But because of the uh, earthquake that took place in 1863, most of these structures fell down. No, so the people in Manila thought na it would be better kung later on, if they would reconstruct their buildings, na they would be kanang using trees na. So, mo na sa to siya nga, mo na sa to siya, how do you call that? Mo na sa siya cause na pod nga nganong ang mga ang forest that was already threatened was further kanang kuan, further threatened because namatol naman noon silang mga kahoy in order to rebuild their homes, to rebuild churches, and to rebuild other buildings. I don't know if you've actually been to old houses in Cebu. Look at these old houses. In particular, if you go to Casagorordo or you go to what do you call this? The Jesuit house, the Jesuit house of 1730, which is thought to be the oldest house in the Philippines. Tanawan ninyo, if tanawan ninyo kung dili makarealize mo nga they had to cut down an entire forest in order to build a single home during the Spanish era. So that would have been a great reason why we lost our forest cover in Cebu.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Sir Dale. Miss BJ Bolivar, one of our literature faculty. First, she'd like to thank you for your wonderful talk. And her question is, do you think there's a gap in current conservation efforts, such as those initiated by corporations or the government, in that they fail to address deforestation as a cultural and historical issue? And would you consider this as a call for history, literature, and cultural studies students or scholars to take a more active role in environmental protection?
Correct, no? I think there, there is now a need, no, for a multidisciplinary approach, no, to conserve what we have left, or kanang multidisciplinary approach po para to address the reforestation campaign. Okay, this would not only need, no, kanang a particular sector na gusto lang mag-tree planting, but perhaps they can also kanang they can also consult historians, and they can also consult ecologists. They can also consult foresters, no, para saktog yun ang approach sa himuon nga reforestation program. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. One of our audience members would like to ask, what various methods of conservation of forests have you yourself done or seen? And maybe he'd also like to get your thoughts on these. If you've participated or if you've seen any significant conservation efforts.
If there is a significant conservation effort, I think we'd have to look at kanang the reforestation, no, of I think kanisiyang kuan bitaw kaning as forest, because I believe dili man gid siya purely kanang kuan di man gid siya purely primary forest, no. Majority of that kay kuan naman na siya secondary forest naman siya. So I think that's a good success story no to look at no niya to follow kay kibaw naman ta na ang katong mga atong reforestation or reforestation efforts no started by the Americans were a failure kay lahi man nga mga species ang ilang pangtanom. And I think that the church also has an effort these days. No, I don't know. It is somewhere in the south. I think it's in Mexico. No, I think mura siya it is in tandem with cement plant. No, yan, nag-reforestation sila niya. They are actually using native trees no para sa ilang reforestation project.
Okay, thank you for that, Sir Dale. So actually we have one more question from a literature major, Ara Ortega. But I think this is still related to the previous question. It's with regard to efforts to restore the forests. If these are still active, basically. She'd like to ask if you're aware of the status of these conservation efforts, if they're still ongoing, and if they're still working or being effective.
What I know now is that ang DNR naagyapon sila efforts no to reforest our kanangkuan denuded mountains in Cebu. As I mentioned also, naapoy katong effort sa church no in coordination with a cement plant in the south na nag-reforest sila sa kanang particular area. I think it's found in Naga, Marikina, San Fernando area. Mo na ilang gibuhat karon. So if di pa man nato mahibaw-an karon kay mao pa may pagpananon nila. So maybe kung they will just take care no, of the saplings that they planted, it might be successful in the future.
Okay, thank you, Sir Dale. So that concludes our open forum session. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. And thank you, Sir Dale, for the very enlightening responses.
You're welcome, Charles.
So yeah, if you still, if any of you audience members still have questions for Sir Dale, like they come to mind after the program, then you may message the Cebuano Study Center page on Facebook, and maybe we can forward these to Sir Dale for him to answer at his soonest convenience. So to share our sincerest gratitude to our esteemed lecturer, we'd like to present a certificate of appreciation to Sir Dale, the citation of which will be read by Bea.
Good afternoon, Sir Dale. Thank you for your presentation. Allow me to present our certificate. The University of San Carlos Cebuano Studies Center presents the certificate of appreciation to Trizer Dale Mansueto for his lecture entitled Axed How Cebu Lost Its Forests, 1880 to 1920, during the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series 2021, given this 25th day of September 2021 via Zoom, signed by the Director of the Cebuano Studies Center, Dr. Hope Sabanpanyu, and the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Father Jesseraj Antonopian, SVD, PhD. Thank you, Sir Dale.
Salamat Bea Cebuano Study Center. Daghang salamat to everyone for listening to this afternoon's lecture.
Thank you once again, Sir Dale. Another warm virtual round of applause, please. So before we officially wind things down, may I remind everyone once again of the evaluation form, the link to which is now available in the chat box below. Take note, you will only receive your certificate of participation for this event if you have filled out said form. So I'd also like to take this time to announce our speaker for next month's installment, Cebuano film expert, Mr. Paul Douglas Grant. Mr. Grant used to be with the University of San Carlos School of Architecture, Fine Arts and Design, but he now teaches Indigenous literature and cinema at CUNA College in Quebec. He has written extensively on Philippine regional cinemas and we can't wait to hear what he has to share next month. The tentative date for this lecture is Saturday, October 23rd. And we would also like to announce the upcoming conference organized by the Cebuano Study Center, Natural Lit Being in Nature, Living with Literature, which is slated for November 4th. Academic papers, panel discussions, and creative works presented during this conference will be considered for subsequent publication. For more information on this and other activities by the center, do feel free to check out the Cebuano Study Center page on Facebook. So we've reached the end of our program, but as is customary now with online events, including this one, of course, may I request everyone or as many participants as possible, depending on your bandwidth, to turn on your videos for a group photo. So Bea will take care of facilitating this, taking the
Thank
group
you.
photo.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, everyone, please turn on your cameras if you can. Let's give everyone a few seconds so that we can all be part of the group photo. All right, I see more cameras opened. Let's wait a little bit more. Hello, Doc Hope. Good afternoon. All right. Okay, everyone, please smile. 1, 2, 3. All right, one more. Smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sir Dale. Thank you very much.
Salamat, Bea.
Thank you, Sir Dale. Thank you, everyone. So thank you so much for attending this September 2021 installment of the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series, and we hope to see you in succeeding lectures. Goodbye and daghang salamat.